Here's some things that make me uncomfortable about where we're at with this. First, let me tell you how corruption works. Not everyone involved in corruption knows everything that everyone else is doing. There is a lot of scapegoating and pawns. And one way a lot of pawns are put into place is that you'll interview 100 people, you'll hire the bottom 10, and then you'll tell those bottom 10 that they were the top 10 out of 1,000. It's like giving them, a God complex, whether those people are put in, handed a badge and a gun. Side note, not all cops are corrupt, but whether they end up being a trick and triggered, young, inexperienced cop, a prosecutor, a district attorney, a public defender, private attorneys posing as prosecutors or public defenders, guardian ad litems, judges, commissioners. And then once a pawn is in place, the people who pulled strings to get them there like to do everything they can to keep those pawns in place, because it can be so hard to get pawns in place, especially when they're in positions like district attorneys, attorney generals that we see in Utah and dozens of the most corrupt states, or even in governor roles. It's just that they've kind of been tricked into these positions and they're not asking the questions they should, and that's kind of why they stay in those positions. And that is not good for anybody, because those questions aren't being asked. It brings danger and terror to all of us, especially the children, the 50,000 children a year and more who are being targeted for these federal subsidy schemes, which were put in place by other pawns previously from other states, Utah and the other corrupt states that make up the 535 member parts of Congress that did this, targeting the good parts of the well-intending federal government. The reason why people can be tricked, triggered, bribed, blackmailed, betrayed, or otherwise duped into these schemes is it kind of goes back to trauma. When people experience trauma, they either choose to heal and pursue the brighter light, which is so rewarding and more rewarding in so many ways, or they choose to hide, haul, and heap, and they use that to take advantage of other people for their own gain, and then they do worse and worse things to hide the worse and worse things they do, and then that just leads to more terrors and tragedy for everyone. And that's really the nuts and bolts of it. That's just basic, rough human psychology right there. That can be intentionally hurting others, or that can be intentionally looking the other way, or not doing what you should, or not asking the kind of questions you should. So when there are people who are in these roles, or who have been in these roles, like a prosecutor or a district attorney or an attorney general, and they didn't ask questions about certain terrors going on, it kind of shows that where the roots of that is, that they might not exactly be the person doing the darkest deeds, but they are looking the other way for their own reasons, and those dark reasons are rooted in a trauma. And we need people in office who are not doing that. That's pretty cut and dry right there. But so when it comes down to questions I have about this July 13th assassination attempt, is that more and more videos continue to come out. We see videos where crooks walked up to that third window from the right, looked in it. We see that Crooks was positioned right above in a way that it would look like his rounds would come from right over that third window from the right. We know Crooks had been to that location like twice in the previous week.
So what they discovered was that this kid was basically doing recon at that site on July 4th and July 8th.
It's likely he climbed on that roof in the roundabout way he did, and he went to that spot because it had been marked that he needed to be in that exact spot. We have video where they first count 5 shells.
Watch out for shell casings.
2, 3, 4, 5 right there.
We have a cutaway in it, and then later in the video they count 8 shells and say on both sides.
Shells over there.
On both sides. Looks like one at least 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Which is counterintuitive to how that weapon would have discarded those shells. We have questions about why have those shells not been tested for fingerprints. We have inconsistent use of orange gloves before cutaway and after cutaway by person in blue. We have the audio that the first 3 shots seem to sound like there was glass breaking after those first 3 shots. That's from the Dave Stewart video. And then the next 5 shots have a different sound. We have inconsistent reflections from that window, as if before the shots it had been replaced with a common form of homemade sugar glass and masking tape used in film and on stage. Then after the shots, reflections from that window consistent with the window being quickly tilted back into place. And for some reason, door number 9 to that building was locked by the handful of people inside, even though it was supposed to be a staging area for officers. Then, after everyone left, a forgotten video camera in a police SUV filmed one of the inside people leaving a Halligan bar for removing and replacing windows that a familiar-looking, now outside person quickly grabbed and walked off with. Project Oversight used cell phone signals to track that someone had visited Crook's house multiple times in the previous year and also visited FBI headquarters.
Interesting.
In the process of looking at all of these phones that visited his home and visited the nursing home where he worked, they found a phone that actually pinged 7 or 8 times in DC at a building called Gallery Place, which has a very large footprint of FBI offices.
Being a Utahn and a former Mormon missionary, I did serve the 2-year Mormon mission before I found what I call a brighter light to that. But I know that a Mormon missionary could have been that person who went to Crook's house and also visited the FBI center in Washington, D.C.
Interesting.
But it gets better than that.
Oh, keep going.
We know there are many, many links to the FBI and the CIA recruiting Mormons. And then it makes me concerned that we have this Arlington controversy supposedly now, that the picture was from a Mormon military member's grave with a Mormon family. They and 4 other families have written letters publicly saying, no, we invited you-know-who to take this picture. But then on the edge of that picture is Utah Governor Spencer Cox for some reason. And who's also Mormon, and who also has been an attorney who didn't ask questions that could have been asked. And then on top of that, there was another link to Spencer Cox and on July 13th, and that is that 2 days before, Utah Governor Spencer Cox publicly went on CNN, which is a very odd thing for a Republican to do, and said he was not going to support Trump in the election. Almost as if someone somewhere had planned that if Trump was assassinated, Utah Governor Spencer Cox would have taken his place, and then his choice as vice president could have even been a leader in the Mormon church. Hearts of Mormonism believe that one day the leader of the Mormons will also be president of the United States. And so that's where it gets scary, and there's connections that go way back to the early 1800s, and we can talk more about this, anyone who wants to. Did Cox also set me up by playing a role in forging a 2-month jail sentence I served earlier this year? This forged jail sentence happened after I announced I should be Utah's governor and is documented on TikTok and in Linktree in my profile.